She didn't ghost you. She didn't forget you. She's testing you. And no, she's not doing it with a quiz or a question. She's doing it with something far more powerful: silence. No reply, no text. No confirmation that she's still interested, just space and what you do in that space. That's the real test. Most men panic. They double text. They overthink. They replay every word they said, every move they made. They call her cold, manipulative, distant. But here's the truth. She's not being cruel. She's watching, not your words, your self-control. Because whether she knows it consciously or not, a woman pulls back not just to see if you'll chase, but to see if you'll collapse. If her silence makes you spiral, if her distance makes you beg, if her pause makes you perform, you've already failed the test. Because the real challenge isn't winning her back, it's staying grounded when she's not there. Stoic men don't chase noise. They don't react to emotional withdrawal with emotional panic. They stay centered, still, silent, but aware. And that silence, it becomes more powerful than any paragraph you could text at 2 a.m. So the next time she pulls away, don't ask, "What did I do wrong?" Ask instead, "What is this silence revealing about me?" Because she may come back, or she may not. But the man who survives her silence without losing himself, he's already won. You think she's being cold, distant, disconnected. But let's be honest, she's not yelling. She's not accusing. She's not even asking anything of you. She's just gone quiet. And that silence, it's louder than words. Because silence from a woman isn't always absence. Sometimes it's assessment. Most men miss this. They see the quiet as rejection, or worse, disrespect. But what they don't see is that silence for many women is how they feel you out. Not your charm, not your words, your foundation, mortati. Because when a woman goes silent, what she's really doing is creating space. And in that space, she watches. She listens not to what you say, but to how well you hold your own center without her validation. You might think she's playing games, but often it's not conscious. She's not following a rule book. She's responding to an instinct. Or can I trust who he becomes when I pull back? That instinct is older than dating apps, older than text messages. It's biological, it's energetic, it's rooted in something primal, security. And not the kind that comes from how much you make or what you drive, but the kind that says, "I'm okay. Even when I'm not being chosen right now." Her silence is a scan of your neediness, your emotional control, your grip on self. And yes, sometimes it's unconscious testing, but that doesn't make it manipulation. It makes it human. Because if you fall apart at the first pause, if you start flooding the void with questions, over-explaining, pleading, you're not giving her security. You're giving her your anxiety and hoping she'll fix it. That's not attraction. That's weight. And no one wants to carry what you haven't learned to hold yourself. So when she gets quiet, don't panic. Don't punish. Don't perform. Observe. Because maybe she's unsure. Maybe she's scared. Maybe she just needs air. Or maybe she needs to know what happens to you when her voice isn't there to fill your silence. And if your identity starts to collapse when hers fades into the background, you've just answered her question without her saying a word. Let's talk about what most men do when a woman pulls away. They react. Not respond, react. It starts small. Maybe you send another text, "Hey, just checking in." You tell yourself it's casual, harmless, but really it's not about her. It's about your discomfort with the space she left behind. Then comes the second message, Then the overanalysis. You replay the last conversation. You wonder if you said something wrong. You call your friends. You stalk her socials. You go on Reddit. And by the third day of silence, you're not dating anymore. You're investigating. What most men don't realise is this: that flurry of action. It's not strength. It's self-abandonment. You're not standing firm. You're scrambling, hoping that movement will fill the stillness. That energy will substitute for clarity. And women feel that. They don't need to read your texts to know what's happening. They can sense it. Your energy shifts from presence to panic, from calm to chaos, from I'm centered to please pull me back into balance. And here's the twist. Most of this happens before she even answers. Because your anxiety isn't in your words. It's in your timing, in your tone, in your inability to let a moment breathe. So she stays silent. Not to punish you, but because your reaction just proved that you don't trust yourself when she's not there. Let's break down the 3 most common mistakes. Step 1, the fixer texts. Hey, did I do something wrong? You think you're being emotionally mature, but what you're really saying is, I can't hold uncertainty without external confirmation. 2, the guilt trap. You could have at least told me if you lost interest. Translation: I need closure because I don't know how to sit with open loops. And 3, the grand gesture. You send flowers, a long message. You try to win her back. Not because she's gone, but because you're gone without her attention. And none of these reactions make her feel safer. None of them build attraction. None of them show strength. They show dependence, wrapped in performance, coated in fear. You don't fail the test because you feel something. You fail because you can't hold what you feel without leaking it everywhere. Stoic masculinity doesn't mean being numb. It means being able to carry your storm quietly until it passes. Because when you can do that, she'll notice, she'll sense it. Not in your words, but in your silence. The kind that doesn't punish, doesn't pout, doesn't demand, just holds. And that silence speaks louder than your most convincing paragraph. You can say all the right things. You can write poetic messages, talk about how much you respect her space claim, you're not like other guys. But none of that matters if your energy tells a different story. Because women don't read your words. They read your response. Not the response you typed, the one you couldn't hide. They notice how quickly you reached out, how long you waited before reacting, whether your silence was strength or strategy, and they can feel the difference. When your calm is performative, when it's just a mask waiting to be rewarded, it crumbles fast. One delayed reply, one story viewed, but not answered, and suddenly your self-control vanishes. You say you're not attached, but your anxiety leaks through your timing, your follow-ups, your shift in tone. Because here's the truth. Your real self is revealed the moment control's taken away. When she stops responding, when the attention goes silent, you get loud. Not always externally, but internally. The thoughts race, the doubts creep in, and if you haven't trained your nervous system to hold space, you react, and she sees it. Because the one thing women are always testing for, consciously or not, is containment. Can you hold discomfort without projection? Can you hold confusion without collapse? Can you stay rooted when the outcome isn't guaranteed? If not, you don't feel safe. And if you don't feel safe within yourself, she won't feel safe with you either. It's not about being emotionless, it's about being responsible for your emotion, owning it without weaponizing it, feeling it without forcing her to fix it, That's what makes a man magnetic. Not his charm, not his status, but his stillness under pressure. Women don't want perfect. They want present. They want consistent. They want a man who doesn't flinch when the mood shifts, because he's not trying to control it. He's simply anchored. And anchoring isn't something you say. It's something you show. Especially in the moments when no one's watching, when no one's replying, when no one is validating your worth. Then, and only then, does your masculinity reveal itself. Not in your words, but in what you choose to do when your words no longer get a reply. Most men were never taught how to hold. They were taught how to chase. Chase affection, chase approval, chase closure. So when a woman pulls away, their instinct kicks in, go get her back. Say the right thing. Prove you're different. Remind her of your worth. But here's what stoic men understand. Chasing is always a confession. It says, I've lost something essential and I need you to give it back. It reveals a subtle panic. If I don't get your attention, I don't know who I am. But holding, that's different. Holding is what you do when the world stops clapping, when the text doesn't come, when she goes quiet and your ego starts screaming. Holding doesn't mean ignoring. It doesn't mean playing games. It means staying rooted in your own sense of self, even when it feels like everything is shifting. You don't chase because you're numb. You hold because you've learned that your worth doesn't live in someone else's reaction. Holding says, I can sit with uncertainty. I don't need your response to validate my position. I don't panic when love isn't loud. That's stoicism. Not the Instagram version, not the quote on the wall kind, but the real version, the kind that makes your gut tighten your chest burn, and still, you don't flinch, because the storm inside you doesn't deserve to become a flood outside of you. Women test this, not cruelly, instinctively. When she pauses, she's asking, will you collapse in the silence? Will you chase just to feel safe again? Or will you stay still, anchored, not absent? You don't need to prove your value. You need to embody it. And that embodiment only shows up when there's nothing left to perform for. Chasing feels like action, but often it's just movement without direction. It distracts you from the deeper truth. You haven't built enough gravity inside yourself to stay centered when someone else moves. So you reach, you press, you push, not out of love, but out of fear. Holding breaks that cycle. It says, I trust myself more than I fear losing you. And that energy is unmistakable. It doesn't demand respect. It commands it, silently, subtly, powerfully. Because the men who chase may get her attention, but the men who hold, they get remembered. Not for what they said, but for what they didn't need to say. And that kind of presence, it lingers long after the conversation ends. Most men think women want attention, that she's pulling back so you'll chase, that her silence is bait and the only way to pass the test is to respond, react, reach out. But the truth is deeper than that. She doesn't want a reaction, she wants stability, not just from you, within you. Because what most women are drawn to is not just love, not just interest, but a man who doesn't lose himself every time she shifts. It's not the good morning texts, it's not the check-ins, it's not even the compliments. It's your consistency, especially when things aren't consistent. Because here's what happens behind the scenes. She might be uncertain, conflicted, testing her own emotions. She might be doubting her timing, her readiness, her attraction. And when she pulls back consciously, or not, what she's often asking, isn't, will you prove yourself? She's asking, can I trust your center when I lose mine? That's what women mean when they say, I just want to feel safe. They don't always mean physically, they mean emotionally, energetically. They want to know that when they feel unstable, you won't mirror that instability back at them. You won't chase, you won't crumble, you won't make it about you. Instead, you'll hold, still, clear, unafraid. Because if every mood shift turns into a conflict, if every silence becomes a panic, if every pause invites drama, she's not just managing her feelings. She's managing yours, and that's exhausting. So no, she doesn't want a reaction. She wants a man who isn't governed by the waves of emotion, hers or his. A man who can feel deeply but isn't led by those feelings. A man who notices but doesn't need to be noticed, back to stay present. That kind of man, he doesn't impress with effort. He influences with energy. His calm isn't cold, it's earned. It's practiced. It's what tells her, I won't punish you for being unsure, and I won't need you to fix my anxiety just so I can feel real. That's the kind of presence that makes a woman feel safe enough to return if and when she's ready. Not because you convinced her, but because you didn't become someone else in her absence. In a world full of men performing for female attention, be the man who doesn't shift to match her silence but simply remains grounded enough for both of you. Not loud, not passive, just present. Because when her nervous system feels yours, holding steady without pressure, without panic, that's when she finally exhales. And often, that's when she comes back. Not to your words, not to your effort, but to your equilibrium. When a woman goes silent, your first instinct is to ask, what did I do wrong? You rewind conversations, you analyze tone, you search for clues in every emoji, every pause, every change in rhythm. You make it about you, because somewhere along the way you learn to equate silence with punishment. But here's what stoic men understand. Not everything a woman does is about you. Sometimes her silence has nothing to do with your words, your actions, your vibe. Sometimes she's just dealing with her own inner noise. And you just happen to be nearby. She might be in a spiral of self-doubt. She might be questioning everything. She might be trying to process something from years ago that has nothing to do with your kindness, your presence, or your timing. And in that state, she doesn't have the energy to manage your need for clarity. So she goes quiet, not to hurt you, but to hold herself. The truth is, women carry more mental and emotional weight than they often show. And when they retreat, it's not always a test. Sometimes it's just emotional survival. But most men can't sit with that ambiguity because it triggers a deeper fear. If she's not talking to me, then I must not matter. But think about that. Why does her emotional fluctuation need to affirm your value? That's not love, that's ego. And ego always wants to make everything personal. It always needs a villain, a reason, a narrative where you are the main character. But her silence might have nothing to do with you and everything to do with her growth, her fear, her process. And if you can't allow that, if you require constant reassurance just to stay balanced, then you're not showing up with love. You're showing up with emotional debt, hoping she'll pay interest on your insecurity. A stoic man doesn't do that. He doesn't demand updates on what doesn't belong to him. He doesn't take every pause as personal rejection. He understands this simple truth. Seems mulkvertijn told. People are allowed to have storms that you're not invited into. Her silence isn't a weapon, it's a boundary. And how you respond to that boundary shows whether you're truly capable of unconditional presence or just playing stable until your needs aren't met. You don't need to chase clarity in every quiet moment. You don't need to decode what was never encrypted. Sometimes the strongest thing you can say is nothing, not out of pride, but out of respect for her internal world. Because if she returns, you want it to be because she found a way back on her own, not because you dragged her there out of fear. And if she doesn't, then you've still won, because you learn to separate your identity from her availability. That's where real freedom begins, not in being chosen, but in staying solid even when no one is choosing you at all. By now, you understand that silence isn't always a rejection, but let's talk about what happens when you let your fear take the wheel. Because even when you know better, there's a part of you that still wants to do something. Send a message, get a reaction, regain control. That's when the sabotage begins. Not because you're weak, but because you're uncomfortable with stillness. And in that discomfort, you start making moves that feel like effort, but read like desperation. Let's break them down. 1. The fixer message. Hey, I'm sensing something's off. Did I do something wrong? Sounds mature, right, wrong. What you're really saying is, I can't handle uncertainty, so please rescue me from it. You're not being accountable. You're outsourcing emotional labour. You want her to comfort you about your own imagination. Ash pinterushatefessent. 2. The passive-aggressive guilt trip. I guess you're just not interested anymore. Or worse, it would have been nice if you just told me you lost interest. Now you've made her silence about your ego. You've painted yourself as the victim and her as the villain just because she didn't move on your timeline. That's not maturity, that's emotional manipulation dressed in hurt feelings. Breathe to the grand gesture. You write a long paragraph. You buy flowers. You post something deep online hoping she sees it. These aren't romantic, they're reactive. And they scream, I'm trying to make noise loud enough to wake you back up. But attraction doesn't grow through noise. It grows through space, through presence, through calm. 4. The disappearing act. You ghost back. Not from peace, but from spite. You block her, unfollow, delete every photo. You call it protecting your peace, but deep down, it's just another form of control. You're hoping your silence will hurt her the way hers hurt you. But that's not detachment, that's revenge. And revenge is just pain with better clothes. 5. The emotional dump. You vent everything. How much she means to you, how confused you are, how you've been overthinking, how much this hurts. It feels honest, maybe even brave. But ask yourself, did she ask for this, or are you making her responsible for what you haven't resolved within yourself? Because expressing is not the same as processing. And dumping your emotional storm on someone else just to feel lighter only makes them carry the weight you refuse to sit with. So what do all these have in common? They're not rooted in love, they're rooted in need. A need for reassurance, a need to be seen, a need to matter because without her attention, you don't know if you still do. That's the hard truth, and the most dangerous part. These moves don't just push her away, they pull you further from your own self-respect. Every time you reach from fear, you teach yourself, I need her to feel okay. And that belief, it's what keeps you in the loop of anxiety and overcompensation. So stop performing, stop proving, stop trying to interrupt the silence just because it's uncomfortable. Let the silence reveal you, but don't let it control you. Because the man who can sit in the quiet, who can face the storm of his own insecurity without forcing someone else to calm it, that's the man she'll remember, even if she never says a word. So if chasing, fixing and performing all backfire, what do stoic men do instead? They stay still, but not passive. They wait, but not from fear. They observe, but not to plan their next move. They remain rooted, because when a woman goes silent, the stoic man doesn't see it as a threat. He sees it as a mirror. Not to read her, but to reflect on himself. He doesn't double text. He doesn't scroll through her posts looking for clues. He doesn't turn his nervousness into narrative. He breathes. He notices the pull to act. He hears the voices in his head that say, "Do something or you'll lose her," and he lets them pass. Because action without clarity is just panic in disguise. And stoic men don't act out of panic. They act out of principle. The principle is this: my emotional state is my responsibility. If her silence makes him spiral, he doesn't make her fix it. He goes inward. He examines what's being triggered. Abandonment, control, rejection. He doesn't suppress the feeling. He sits with it, names it, and reminds himself, this discomfort is mine, and it will not break me. That's power. Stoic men also maintain their rhythm. They don't pause their life waiting for a reply. They don't stop showing up for themselves. They go to the gym. They focus on their craft. They nourish their routine. Because their life doesn't orbit her reaction. It continues calm, intentional, disciplined. And if the moment comes to speak, they do it from center, not from chaos. Not to get a result, but to express a truth. I sensed some distance. If you need space, I respect that. If you've moved on, I accept it. Either way, I'm good. That kind of message, it's not a grab, it's a release. And women feel the difference. Because it's not laced with guilt. It's not bait. It's clarity. The stoic man isn't trying to win. He's trying to live aligned. Aligned with values, with peace, with himself. He understands that attraction isn't about chasing. It's about offering presence without pressure. He doesn't perform strength. He practices it. And when the silence ends, whether she returns or doesn't, he's not shaken. Because his value didn't depend on her return. It was never up for debate. So what do stoic men do instead? They stay still. They stay present. They stay themselves. And in a world of men scrambling for attention, that kind of stillness is magnetic. Silence isn't always an enemy. Sometimes it's a mirror. But most men don't see it that way. They see silence as rejection, as abandonment, as the beginning of the end. Because when you're used to measuring your worth by how others respond to you, every quiet moment feels like a warning. But a stoic man, he uses the silence differently, not as a threat to his identity, but as a reflection of it. He doesn't ask, "What is she thinking?" He asks, "What is this moment revealing about me?" Because silence exposes what noise usually hides. It shows you where you're still reactive, where your peace depends on permission, where your confidence is conditional. Ask yourself, why does her silence feel personal? Is it because you need constant feedback to feel secure? Is it because you believe attention equals affection? Or is it because deep down you haven't built a version of yourself that feels whole in the absence of being wanted? These are hard questions, but that's what the silence is for. It's not empty, it's revealing. When the noise is gone, you start to hear the quiet questions. Am I performing in this relationship? Am I addicted to validation? Do I even like myself without her interest? And here's the part most men avoid. It's not her job to answer those questions. It's yours. Because until you do, you'll keep needing women to soothe something that only your inner work can resolve. You'll confuse connection with attention, and every pause will feel like a punishment. But when you use the silence as a mirror, you begin to detach from that need, not by numbing out, not by pretending you don't care, but by observing the storm without letting it carry you away. You start seeing the difference between I want her and I need her to feel okay. And when that shift happens, you no longer rush to fill the space. You respect it, you reflect in it, you grow through it. Because silence isn't just about what's missing, it's about what you've avoided meeting in yourself. Your restlessness, your ego, your fear of being unseen. But the man who can meet those parts of himself without blame, without escape, he becomes unshakable. He doesn't need the silence to end, because he no longer fears what it might say. He's already listened, he's already learned, he's already leveled up. So next time the silence comes, don't rush to break it. Sit in it, ask the deeper question, and then listen. Because the man who can stay silent, without shrinking, without chasing, without folding, is the man who no longer runs from himself. And that kind of man doesn't need a reply to feel real. There's a moment every man faces a quiet breaking point where he realizes, what I thought was love was just a fear of not being seen. Neediness doesn't always look like begging. Sometimes it looks like kindness with an agenda, support with strings, affection that expects a receipt. And when a woman goes quiet, it exposes all of it. You start to notice how much of your attention was actually a performance, how much of your connection was built on a loop of giving, hoping she'd validate you in return. That's not presence, that's strategy. But stoic men don't relate through need, they relate through being. Because they've made the shift from neediness to presence. Neediness says, I exist through your response. Presence says, I exist regardless of it. Neediness panics when she pulls back. Presence observes. Neediness rushes to fill silence. Presence breathes into it. Neediness reacts to emotion. Presence contains, it feels it, but never lets it lead. And that shift, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens the first time you let go of chasing and choose to stay grounded in your own life. It happens the moment you realize her attention doesn't add to me, it joins me. And if it leaves, I'm not less. I'm simply left with more space. Presence doesn't push, it invites. And when it's not accepted, it doesn't collapse. It remains. Women feel that because presence is a frequency. It's not in your words, it's in your stillness, your timing, your decision not to explain yourself into being understood. The more you live in presence, the less you need performance. You no longer text just to stay relevant. You no longer ask how she feels just so you can adjust who you are. You stop looking for signs because you've stopped outsourcing your peace. And ironically, that's when you become most attractive. Because presence doesn't chase, it draws in. It says, I'm not here to win you over. I'm here because I've already won myself. That energy, it's unmistakable. It's unforgettable. It's what makes a woman lean in when silence no longer feels like pressure, but permission. And if she doesn't lean in, you're still whole. Because the man you became in the space where she said nothing, that's the man who can now walk through any relationship without fear of losing himself. That's the man who's not seeking attention. He's living in alignment, not loud, not desperate, not waiting, just here. And for the first time, that's enough. So what happens when you don't react? When she pulls back and you don't chase? When she goes quiet and you don't fill the silence? When everything inside you wants to move, fix, speak, but you stay still? Something powerful unfolds. First she feels it, even if she doesn't respond, even if she never says a word. She feels your non-reaction because it stands out in a world full of noise. Most men scramble. They rush to explain, to clarify, to secure the connection. But you do the rarest thing a man can do in that moment. You trust yourself. You don't assume the worst. You don't demand resolution. You simply remain. That calmness it radiates, not through control, but through containment. And to a woman, that's unforgettable, because it tells her this man doesn't just want me, he knows himself in the absence of me. And whether she comes back or not, you've already shifted something deeper, your self-respect. You didn't panic. You didn't perform. You didn't sell out your power for a reaction that would have only quieted your ego for 5 minutes. Instead, you stepped into a new frequency, one where peace isn't a prize someone else grants you, but a standard you maintain within. And here's what often happens next. Sometimes she reaches out. Not because you chased, but because you didn't. Because your silence wasn't cold, it wasn't resentful, it was strong, grounded, open but not needy. It made space, and she could feel that space without pressure. She returns because your energy felt like freedom, not like obligation. And if she doesn't return, you're not shattered, you're centered. Because by not reacting, you didn't just pass a test, you passed your own. You showed yourself that you can stand in discomfort without collapsing, that you can watch someone drift without needing to become someone else to bring them back. And that strength, it rewires your nervous system, it redefines your identity, it builds something that can't be taken away by silence or by someone else's choice. So what happens when you don't react? You evolve. You become the kind of man who doesn't force alignment, he lives in it. The kind of man who doesn't fear uncertainty, he uses it. And the kind of man who understands. T. If someone pulls away and I remain grounded, then I've already given myself what they couldn't. Her silence was never the problem, it was just a pause you didn't know how to sit with, a pause that echoed louder than it should have because of what you brought into it. Your fear, your stories, your need for certainty. You thought her silence was an insult, a rejection, a test, and maybe, sometimes it was. But most of the damage, it didn't come from her quiet. It came from your reaction to it, from the way you twisted the space into meaning, from how quickly you tried to fix it, escape it, or control it. You gave the silence a story, one where you were the victim and she was the villain. But what if the silence wasn't personal? What if it was neutral? What if it was just a moment, one that could have passed had you not poured your insecurity into it? That's the hard truth. Most pain in relationships isn't caused by the other person, it's caused by the way we interpret their behaviour. We don't get hurt because someone pulled away. We get hurt because we decided what that distance meant about us. And that's the lesson. Not just in romance, in life. The world will go quiet on you. People will drift. Messages will stop. Moments will feel unresolved. You can't control that, but you can control how you meet the silence. Do you fill it with panic or with presence? Do you chase it with noise or sit in it with strength? Because when you stop making her silence a reflection of your worth, you reclaim your power. You stop demanding answers. You start becoming one. You stop grasping for attention. You start embodying intention. And that shift, it changes everything. Suddenly silence isn't scary, it's sacred. It becomes the space where you meet yourself, fully, honestly, without distraction. So no, her silence was never the problem. It was an invitation, and whether you responded with chaos or calm, that part was always yours. You don't need her to speak for you to feel complete. Because the man who can sit through silence without losing his center, he's already said everything he needs to, not with words, but with who he's become, and that is the only message that truly lasts. Her silence wasn't rejection, it was space. And space for most men is terrifying because it reveals everything we try to avoid. The noise within, the need for control, the fear of being unseen. But if you can remain still inside her silence, you're no longer seeking power. You've stepped into presence, and that's where real connection begins with her, or with yourself. What does silence bring up in you? Panic performance, or peace?